Are woke school boards helping our kids achieve academic excellence and prepare for the real world? Today's guest doesn't think so. Michael Zwaagstra joins us from Steinbach, Manitoba. He is a public high school teacher and a senior fellow with the Fraser Institute. He's also the author of A Sage on the Stage, Common Sense Reflections on Teaching and Learning. Michael, it's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Michael, you recently wrote an article in the Epoch Times on the TDSB, which is the Toronto District School Board, with regard to how you believe that their woke policies are negatively impacting their students. Can you just explain what you mean by woke?
Yeah, woke is a word that gets used a lot, and the definition is actually pretty simple. It means to have an obsession, an unhealthy obsession with personal identity characteristics such as race, gender, and sexual orientation. And what happens in woke ideology is people get slotted into various categories, and it's determined, who's more oppressed and such. And so policies then end up focusing on trying to deal with the alleged oppression that any particular group is facing. And so, obviously, my concern with many school boards, and particularly the Toronto District School Board, is the degree to which their policies are focused on those characteristics rather than on simply improving classroom instruction for all students.
And in 2022, the TTSB trustees changed the admissions criteria for their specialty arts and sports schools from a performance-based standard to a random lottery system. Why would they do this?
Well, these specialty schools are based on things such as sports and dance, areas where students develop certain specific skills. The problem is that TDSB, they felt that it was unfair, that it was inequitable to admit students on the basis of performance. Because what had happened, as you would expect to happen in these kinds of schools, is that there would be some level of aptitude testing to see whether students have skills in those particular areas, and whether they have done sufficient practice, that they're able to do well in that particular program. And they felt that was inequitable, and so they took those criteria out, and now it's simply based on a random lottery system. And so, regardless of skill and regardless of aptitude, students are admitted on basically in a random process. And what ends up happening is that you have students at a lower level coming into the school, which is inevitably going to lower the ability of that school to provide that specialized instruction. I mean, that's the appeal of these specialty schools, is because they're able to focus on particular skill sets. But unfortunately, because they're committed to this idea that it's inequitable to have admission based on performance, they turn it to a random lottery system, which is going to obviously water down the quality of their specialty schools.
So as a student, if I woke up one day and said, I want to pursue performing arts, but I couldn't sing or act a note or sing a note or act to save my life, I could still get admitted?
Absolutely, and you see the problem here, because if you're admitting a large number of students that don't have skills and aptitude and haven't been practicing and building up in those areas, you get too many students that fall into that category. You're going to have to dumb down the instruction. I mean, that's the only way that you're able to handle it at that point, which of course completely undermines the whole idea of these specialty schools in the first place.
And you point out that these same trustees are now moving ahead with plans to rename schools bearing the names such as John A. Macdonald and Henry Dundas. What's the problem with having schools named after famous Canadian historical figures? I mean, John A. Macdonald is our first prime minister.
Well, like most Canadians, I don't see a problem with it. I mean, obviously, it's not uncommon to have schools and other major public facilities named after people like our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, as the obvious example. But again, because of their focus on their woke ideology and this emphasis on race and sexual orientation and gender, basically any past politician who ever said or did anything that doesn't meet 21st century standards, which is pretty much anyone who lived back then, if we're going to be honest. Because obviously, John A. Macdonald, as a case in point, was a man of his times. Yes, he did things that were bad, and yes, he said things that certainly indicated, that indicated some racist beliefs. That was a very common thing, unfortunately, in the 1800s. But he also built our country. I mean, he's a key reason why Canada exists today. And so, if we're only going to honor people who meet 21st century standards in terms of what everyone believes now, well, then we're not going to name schools after anyone from that era. And then of course students aren't going to get exposed to these important names. And I find that when you have names on schools and public places, they're great teaching moments and great teaching opportunities. And so I think TDSB is making a big mistake here. Not to mention the fact that it's expensive. It costs money to rename schools. You have to go through a whole process, and you have to do this consultation, and you have to pay for new signage and change all your cards that you hand out about your school. It's a big deal.
It's not just about just taking the letters down off the building and putting new ones up. And you write that the TTSB employs a lot of senior bureaucrats in special DEI departments. And I'm sure that there are those that believe that's a good thing. Why do you see that differently?
Well, I've always believed it's important for school boards to put first things first, and that the most important thing is to make sure you have good quality classroom teachers. And so every person that you hire and add into the bureaucracy is one more teacher that you're not going to hire and put into the classroom. And so school boards get their money from the public. There's only finite dollars available. And so, again, every dollar that goes into their central office, into these various administrative programs, is one less dollar that goes into the classroom. So, when it comes to priorities, I just think that their priorities are misguided. It makes far more sense to focus on the classroom rather than on your central office.
And I should clarify, when we're talking about DEI, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if the Toronto District School Board is correct in believing that their DEI focus is helping students, then we should expect to see some results. How are they doing when it comes to academic excellence and performance levels?
Well, not particularly well. I mean, Ontario, when you look at the Program for International Student Assessment, those are the known as the PISA tests. Those are done every 3 years, and they're international assessments in areas such as reading, and math, and science. Over the last 20 years, Ontario students as a whole have declined by approximately 2 grade levels, the equivalent of 2 grade levels in math, and the approximate equivalent of half a grade level in reading. And obviously, because the Toronto District School Board is the largest school board in the province, they obviously make up a significant part of the provincial average. And so they are contributing to that downward trend. Now, Ontario on the whole, when you compare to other countries around the world, other jurisdictions, it does reasonably well. But the concerning thing is the steady decline. And again, you can look at it on a chart. It's a pretty straightforward decline in both reading and math over the last 20 years. And obviously, that's not acceptable.
But I understand that the TTSB is wanting to see their DEI initiatives expand. Why are they doing this if their metrics are on a decline?
Well, I think they're committed to a particular ideology. And I mean, at one of their board meetings, when they passed the resolution to request that the province make DEI certification mandatory for all teachers across the province, again, these are programs that they cost money and they're unnecessarily divisive. And just to be clear, this is not about being opposed to things such as diversity and inclusion. Obviously, those are good things. Canada is a diverse country, and we do want people to be included. But you can do that without having departments that create programs that try to focus on these things. And you can have genuine diversity, which would include diversity of thought as well, not just simply diversity in appearance, by having a free and open climate where students are allowed to have different opinions and teachers can have different opinions and don't push their views on students, but rather help students think for themselves. That's how you promote true diversity.
And you were talking about the province getting passing a motion to force all teachers in the province to obtain this DEI certification. So what would that entail?
Well, that would mean that teachers, if the province adopted this, and I really hope that they don't, that teachers would have to take, I guess, a course in DEI, whether that's an online or in person, I don't know. So that would mean, of course, you'd have to hire people to run the course. Teachers would have to be either taken out of the classroom in order to do this course, or else be paid extra to take the course outside of regular working hours. Or just it gets added to the workload, and then teachers have less time to do their classroom prep. No matter what scenario you look like, this is not good for students. It costs money, it costs time, and it's unnecessarily divisive.
Now, there's a sad story from 2023 where a school principal under the Toronto District School Board took his own life. And apparently this was after being bullied and humiliated during a mandatory DEI training session. Do you know the details of this and how the TTSB responded to this?
Well, this is a very well-known case. His name is Richard Bilkstow, and he was a well-respected principal of a high school in Toronto, and he was attending a virtual DEI session where the presenter was making the claim that Canada is a more racist country than the United States. Because Richard Bilkstow had spent time living in the United States and working there, he spoke up and said, actually, that's not true. Canada is much more accepting. And instead of either accepting the correction or at least agreeing to disagree, the presenter decided to make an example of him. And then in subsequent sessions, which he was still having to participate in, she was using him as an example of this is the kind of systemic racism that we have to overcome. And obviously, when you're a well-respected principal, that's highly humiliating. After this happened, the senior administrators at the district did not back him up, and he ended up having to go. He went on leave. There was a whole investigation by the Workplace Compensation Board, I believe it is, a whole investigation which found that he had been subjected to harassment. And sadly, he ended up taking his own life. And this has been very well publicized, and it's a very well-known case. And it's a very tragic example of what can happen when someone ends up being subjected to a certain level of harassment and bullying.
And the school board did an investigation, but apparently it didn't release its findings to the public. And so, how is this justified?
Yeah, and this is what's particularly odd is that the district did conduct an investigation and hired a firm to do that, and they did receive the report that has been publicly stated, but they're choosing not to release the report. Now there have been requests from people, including at least one trustee within the TDSB, saying, "Look, this report should be released." But up to this point, a majority of the school board has chosen not to release the report. And obviously, considering how well publicized this case was, this report it really should be released. The public has a right to know what the investigators found out.
And in your opinion, what needs to change in the approach being used to get kids to improve their reading and math skills?
Well, there's some very obvious things we can do. And so, for example, in the area of reading, focus more on phonics, where students learn how to sound out the letters and words, and so that way they can actually read. Research has been done for decades on this. It's overwhelming. It's a pretty straightforward case. Even the Ontario Human Rights Commission had did an in-depth study a few years ago and found that it's frankly a human rights violation that reading is not being taught in the most effective way. And that same report pointed to the evidence for phonics. In math, obviously having a stronger emphasis on memorizing basic math facts and learning standard algorithms for things like adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing would be helpful. And having more content-rich learning environments, meaning that there's more of a focus on making sure students learn lots of facts, because it's not about winning a trivia contest. It's about making sure students are able to comprehend what they read. Phonics helps you sound out the words and be able to say the words. Having background knowledge makes it possible for you to understand what you're reading. You need both background knowledge and phonics. You put those together, you get some really strong readers. That's the type of thing that all school boards should be doing, including TDSB.
And I'm sure like there's some parents out there that are finding some of these policies fairly problematic. For instance, specialty schools admitting students on a lottery system as opposed to a merit-based system. So what will it take to get woke school boards to change their direction? Do we need like legislative changes, or do parents need to just put more pressure on the school trustees?
Well, it would be all of the above. Obviously, parents should use their voices and should contact their local school trustees. I know in Ontario there are municipal elections coming up this year, and so they should vote for trustees that will focus more on the academic basics. That would obviously be a good step. The provincial government needs to do more. I mean, the Doug Ford government has said some of the right things as far as wanting to crack down on this and focus on the basics. But when it comes to actual implementation, it hasn't been following through. It needs to be much clearer with school boards about what's acceptable and what's not.
Michael Zwaagstra is a public high school teacher and a senior fellow with the Fraser Institute, and the author of A Sage on the Stage, Common Sense Reflections on Teaching and Learning. Michael, great to have you with us.
Thank you very much again for having me.